everybody, it's Sarah, and today is gonna be another lazy wrap-up. I don't know if you can tell, I can certainly tell that I'm wearing a sweater that is older than I am. I don't know how it's looking online. This is like a no outdoors, just inside, you know, lying about, doing nothing type of sweater. But September is over. My birthday month is over, and so let's talk about the types of books that I read in September. I finished a total of 7 books, so not too bad. Kind of, I think, just below average for what I've so far read this month. Not this month, this year. Because I've been around, like, I think 9 books so far this year. I almost read 100 books already, and it's 9 months over, so like, you know, maybe even over 10 books a month. I don't know. Whatever. Slightly below average. Anyway, also feels like not a lot of what I read really stuck, but let's just get into it, and let's start for once with a reread. I haven't had a lot of rereads so far this year. I don't know if this might even be the first reread that I had this year, and it's Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I am very glad that I got onto the Broken Binding like fantasy subscription, the series subscription, series backlog subscription, just in time for this one. The first book, when I first read it, I think it was 2020 or 2021, the year that it came out, I gave this 5 stars. It was one of my favorite books of the year. I still gave it 5 stars on my first reread. I was a bit disappointed with the second book, so I'm very excited to see how I think of it when I reread the second book, because it just actually arrived at the post office today, so we'll see. Maybe I'll still go out today and get book 2. I will definitely reread it in October. But yeah, this was the 3rd time in total that I read this book, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, the first book in the Between Earth and Sky series, and I have to say, overall, it still holds up to me. Like, I don't think that if I read this now for the first time that I would still give it 5 stars, but it would still be a solid 4 stars, and I definitely enjoyed it enough to the point where on reread I don't feel like revising my ratings, which I very rarely do. I generally only revise my ratings if I would give it a higher rating than on first read, or if I'm just really not okay with a book anymore, and usually I don't then give it like 1 star or something. I just, you know, delete all ratings that I have of the book. But what is this series about? This is a high fantasy series inspired by the cultures of pre-Columbian America. Specifically, like when you look more closely, a lot of cultures, as far as I gathered, that are within Central America as well as, you know, the south of North America. And you follow 3 different characters. One of those characters is a teak, which is kind of a type of siren, mermaidy type of character who is the captain of a ship and who is told she has to bring a certain person to another city, to this big city, in time for a convergence of like celestial bodies. The second character is that person has to be brought to that city, and he has been told from when he was very small that he is the avatar of a god, and his utmost goal is to get revenge for his people. And then the third character that we follow is leading up to this convergence within this city that everyone's like kind of going to, and she is a priestess, like the highest priestess within the city, trying to prepare for the rituals that are gonna be like happening during the convergence. And so we follow those 3 people heading towards basically confrontation. Like, we know there's gonna be a confrontation of some kind by the end. And yeah, I just still really enjoy it. I think the characters are really solid. I love Shalas and I forgot what was his name. You know, this guy's relationship. I do actually really enjoy the Sun Priestess this time around also, although like this third time around, I don't remember if I had that already a lot the second time around, but this third time around I definitely noticed some of the like underlying tension within this character a lot more, especially when it comes to almost religious zealotry is not really the right word, but like being very set in her ways and like how it has to work within the city of the relationships between like the more secular leaders as well as the religious leaders, etc. And yeah, I overall had a really good time once again. And I'm definitely excited for book 2. Going into it with a bit more trepidation because I did give it 3 stars the first read around, but it definitely was a disappointment compared to the first book. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where the story will take me the second time around, and then after that to finally finish this trilogy because I have not picked up book 3 so far. So once I get my Broken Binding edition, I will definitely finally finish this trilogy. Next, I'm gonna try once again to go like from lower rated to higher rated. So next is 7 Recipes for a Revolution by Ryan Rose. This is the first book in the What We Eat series. I assume it's either gonna be a duology or trilogy because that's what most series are. This one follows Patrick, who is a butcher. He lives in a city where there's commons and there's rares. And the commons are the common people, the rares are basically the nobility, and the commons are oppressed by the rares. And it's also within this world where there's these special animals that get butchered. Mostly that's a thing that commons have to do, that butchers have to do, as Patrick is one, and Patrick wants to become a chef. Because when you become a chef, you get to be a rare, and also you maybe get to discover greater recipes, which are recipes that kind of give you special powers depending on the recipe. And so one day Patrick accidentally discovers one such a recipe as one of the massive kaiju-like animals that they butcher gets loose and starts destroying his home, basically. And the way this is told is, it very much is told kind of Ruin of Kings style. Also, I think Empire of the Vampire is told like that. So we have our main character who is currently imprisoned. He is on trial and he is now currently telling his story to how he got where he is to an archivist. And so we switch back and forth between Patrick imprisoned and Patrick now calling himself Chef King. So we know that something happened, and we're kind of slowly revealing his past from being just a common butcher to being this Chef King, although we haven't gotten quite to that part yet within the first book. And so I was really excited for this, also because it supposedly very well was also commenting on, like, you know, class relations and then oppression, etc. But also was marketed as having a humorous tone, and I do think that the humorous tone was there. However, overall I ended up giving this 2.75 stars because, and I don't know if the issue is the arc I had an arc copy of this. I got an arc copy of this at the end of last year, so almost a year ago. I don't know if there were still revisions left to do. Also, the arc copy that I had, the formatting was still very messy overall. So like between, it sometimes felt like within a paragraph we switched between Patrick telling the story and now Patrick back in the cell telling the archivist the story, like, you know, current times and past. And it just, the formatting was messy, and then overall the story structuring also still felt very messy in a way that I just didn't like. And I don't know if it was because I had just a very, very early art copy, or if it actually just isn't that well written. I believe this is also a debut novel, so there might also be a chance for that. I don't know, I really enjoyed the beginning, but the longer the story went on, the more I just felt kind of just lackluster about the book, and also just because you have your main character and the archivist joke about there being a terrible romance and like the romance not being that well written or that well told, doesn't mean that you're then excused in like actually writing a kind of just lackluster, boring romance, you know? Just because you comment on it being boring doesn't necessitate the thing being boring, actually. And then it also, I don't know, I don't want to go out there and say anything because I don't actually know about the identity of the author. I don't know if the author is queer or not. But personally, for me, some of the queer stuff just felt kind of very shoehorned in a way that felt more like it was catering to, you know, a queer community or a community of queer readers rather than actually feeling very coherent within the world. So yeah, it was kind of weird also because like the first thing which I did somewhat appreciate was that all the characters introduced themselves by their name but also instantly by their pronouns, which I think was cool, but also it kind of just very abruptly stopped like the text a lot of times, and made it feel kind of unnatural. So I don't know, it just a little bit all over the place. I appreciate it, wasn't necessarily to my preference, and yeah, so I don't think I will even continue on with the series, to be honest, which is a shame because I do also really like the cover, so yeah, but that's that. Next, I had two books that I gave 3.5 stars. The first of those, actually the later one of those, because the other one I read earlier, but you know, that's the one that I grabbed first, was You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique. This one is translated from Spanish. It's by a Mexican author, and it's basically kind of speculative fiction, I'm gonna say. Like, not speculative fiction in the way of like fantasy or anything like that, but speculative fiction in the way of alternate history of Cortes coming to Moctezuma II. So like kind of the eve of the Mexica or Aztec Empire. And it's written like all over the place in a positive way. I don't know how else to describe it. It's basically a bunch of inner monologues from a bunch of different characters surrounding those two historical figures. And it's the two of them first meeting. And that's kind of all I want to say. Pretty much. Also, the sun just came out, so that's why the light changed. But that's kind of all I want to say because the book is only 200 pages long. It's a wild ride. There's a lot of drugs being taken. Something I do really appreciate is that, although appreciate is the wrong word, but something I find really interesting is that while this is a type of alternate history, it does also in parts kind of make this ruler of, or the last ruler of the Mexica into a kind of silly figure. This ruler who has been mythologized a lot, which, you know, there's very complicated history there, especially with colonization, and with how we tend to talk about colonization. But yeah, it's just really, really interesting. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It was one of those books that like fundamentally changed me. I enjoyed it in the moment. I'm gonna be moving on from this very quickly, however. But yeah, it's just very interesting book. Definitely recommend if you're looking for like more international speculative fiction. The other book that I gave 3.5 stars to was The Water Outlaws by Huang. This one I buddy read with Steph from Coffee Over Apples and Scylla from Scylla's Pocats. For those of you who don't know, the three of us started a book club together. We started originally last year with buddy reading Stormlight Archive by now we have decided that we're going to do a quarterly book club. So every quarter we read a book and we talk critically about it on one of our channels. We did already have our live show for the Water Outlaws, which was our most current book, so I will leave that video, which was on Steph's channel, down below, and I will also leave the Discord for the quarterly crit club down below if you're interested in joining us over there. The next book we read is Blood Cyan by, I forgot the author's name, which is the first book in a YA duology. And basically every quarter one of us chooses a book that we force the other two to read, and then we have a live show at the end and talk about it. The Water Outlaws was Scylla's pick. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. This one is apparently a very roughly inspired by like Chinese mythology, folklore, or a story, like a Chinese story. It's roughly inspired by a Chinese story about this like group of outlaws. However, most of the characters from the original story are gender bent within this version. We mainly follow two characters. The first of them is Lin Zhong. Lin Zhong is like, she's not a general or admiral, however she is a martial arts teacher within the army. She is quite respected. But one day something happens, she takes it on with the wrong official, who sends her to be imprisoned and then sends guards with her to murder her. However, she is saved and she joins this group of bandits who want to go against corrupt officials. And then the second character that we follow is Lu Chunyi, who is like an academic, a researcher, and she is somewhat forced, mostly forced, by another official to try and create this, I'm gonna call it magic weapon. Magic weapon is like not at all accurate to what it is, but like basically she's supposed to create a MacGuffin. And so we follow these two women who used to be friends, whose lives are now completely separate from each other, who do not even know what happens to the other anymore, but like you follow the two of them on their ways. I overall did really enjoy the writing of this one. I did appreciate the writing. I especially enjoyed the storyline of Lu Chunyi. However, I just, especially when it came to the bandits, there were just like too many characters going on for me to fully connect to any of them specifically. So I just ended up not really caring that much about them by the second half of the book, personally. And then thematically, I also didn't, while I understand the choices that the author made, I thematically didn't like the choices that the author made. Personally, I would have preferred a different ending. So yeah, but if you want to know more, if you don't mind spoilers, although we do have, like, we start talking about the books in a spoiler-free way, but if you don't mind spoilers, if you want my more exact thoughts on why I gave this 3.5 stars, again, the live show is down below, and I need to change battery now. And we are back. So next I have a book that I gave 3.75 stars to, and that is The Last Crown by Elżbieta Czeresinska. This one is the second book in a duology, which is called The Bold. It's a duology, a historical fiction duology that was translated from Polish, and it's set around the year 1000. So like about 25 years, 30 years earlier, and like about 20 years after. But around the year 1000. And we follow one character called Sviatoslava, and the interesting thing about her is she is the sister of a Polish duke, of the duke who later on became the first king of Poland. And she is also a historical figure that was married to two Viking kings. We think. There's like a lot of different discussions about whether these three women were actually the same person, because they are also like named different names within like sagas and historical sources, etc. But basically it's about her and about the people surrounding her, which gets very wild because basically you have two different stories. One is like Scandinavia, the uniting of Norway under a crown, or Sweden and like Denmark, and then like running to England and like that whole thing, and also the Christianization of the Scandinavian countries. And then on the other hand you have the story of Svetislava's brother, who constantly has it out, either is allied or has it out with the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, and then there's always someone running to Rome trying to get crowned. It's wild. It's a wild ride. I really enjoyed it. However, I will say, to be fair, I think one of the main reasons that I did enjoy it so much was that I constantly was researching the names and like trying to figure out who they were in history and how much we know about them from history, etc. So that's just something that I really enjoyed with this one, and it just really gave me that. So this book is a book that follows like especially the historical, like the stuff that historically happens, very closely, while taking some liberties with the exact motivations and also characterizations of the characters, and like, you know, who influenced whom to make which decision and so on. But yeah, definitely enjoyed it once again. It's two books. They're both quite chunky, like both around 500 pages. But it's a fun time, especially since it also focuses on a portion of Europe that we don't see a lot of historical fiction from. Like, we definitely do get our Viking, Scandinavian, Nordic historical fiction, but we do not get to see a lot of the history of like Western, Northern, Eastern Europe. Or the northwest of Eastern Europe, so like Poland, Ukraine, there's like parts of Ukraine in there. Part of this is set in Kiev. Then Czechoslovakia also plays a role, kind of. I'm saying the modern terms, well, Czechoslovakia is not the modern term, but like the rough modern regions, but back then obviously they were like the places of power were different compared to today, or political borders were different than today. But yeah, so I definitely really enjoyed this, gave it 3.75 stars, and I'm happy I'm done with the duology. Also, again, I especially recommend this if you're like a bit of a history nerd and love researching historical figures from historical fiction novels. Next, I had a 4.5 stars, and that was First Rider's Call by Kristen Britton. This is the second book in the Green Rider series, which I think, I tried to research it once again, I think there's currently a total of 9 or 10 books. I already have the third book with me, and this one is a YA series. However, it's very noticeable that this was written at a time before YA was really established as a genre in the way that it is today. So the way it's written is not like stereotypical YA language, the way that we have it today, or that it's common today, but it's like, it veers a little bit more adult in the language sometimes. Although I don't know if like the later books are actually YA. I know the first one officially is YA. I don't know about the later ones, because I do think our main character in this one is already in her early 20s. This series follows Kerrigan, and Kerrigan in the first book runs away from the school where she's supposed to go to. I think she actually was like thrown out of the school. She's the daughter of the wealthiest merchant in this kingdom, and while riding back home, she comes across a Green Rider with an arrow in his back. And the Green Riders are the messengers of the king. They kind of, even though within this kingdom magic is generally frowned upon, they have this like magical, mystical thing about them and these magical abilities. And the message that this Green Rider had to carry back to the king latches onto Kerrigan in a way. And so she feels compelled to now bring this message to the king, which is a message of doom, basically, of this old, ancient, evil reawakening. And so in the second book, obviously, we continue on with the story. I really love Kerrigan. I do love that we now got more into a possible romance between her and the king, which I already saw in book 1, but I'm happy that we didn't start it in book 1 because the king was like, I don't know, mid-end 20s, and Kerrigan was like, what, 16, 17? Now she's in her early 20s and he's like 30, so it's still not great, but you know, it's older fantasy. You kind of have to deal with these age differences. But yeah, I love Kerrigan as a character. I especially loved with this one because it felt like the important stuff was always going on somewhere else, and the only thing that Kerrigan did was like trying to hold everything together back at the castle where the king is. So that was very interesting, and yeah, I'm probably gonna continue on with the series this month, if I do as Scylla told me to do, because I gave her 2 choices of series to continue and one of them was this one. But yeah, we're probably gonna be continuing on here, and I'm just very excited to see where the story goes. And then the last one, we'll see if I can actually manage to upload a review of this, which I really should, especially because I have a lot of thoughts. But last, I of course finished Catabasis by R.F. Huang. This was the buddy read for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, which is all about reading mostly fantasy, adult fantasy, written by women and genderqueer folk. And so this month in September we read Catabasis. By the way, if you want to join us for October, also links down below. We're reading The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. But Catabasis is R.F. Huang's newest book. It's once again dark academia. It's about Alice and Peter, whose PhD advisor dies. And so the 2 of them, because they need his recommendation to get a proper job, and also, you know, how are they supposed to finish their PhD without him? They would have to find a whole new advisor, which is very impractical. The 2 of them decide to go to hell to find the advisor. And this book has had a lot of discussions surrounding it. There's been discussions of this is too academic. There's been discussions of this is not academic enough. There's been discussions of if you don't understand this book, you're stupid. There's been discussions of like, who's stupid? R.F. Huang is like, so on your nose, it's painful. I just have to say, I gave this 5 stars. I adored this. I love this. Did I enjoy it quite as much as Babel? No. Babel I still prefer, but that's mostly due to the tone. I prefer a more tragic story than to a humorous story, which, saying that, this has a humorous tone. This story is less tragic than any of R.F. Huang's other books that I've read. However, Alice is a fundamentally incredibly depressed and suicidal character. Suicidal ideation is one of the content notes and content warnings I would give for this book also. So, you know, just because it has a humorous tone doesn't mean that it doesn't deal with incredibly dark topics also. And the thing that I will say about, like, is it too academic, is it not academic enough? This is a book that I think is perfectly readable even if you understand none of the references. However, a lot of the references are also very specific, and to the point where I think you won't even notice the references if you are not familiar with what is being referenced, right? Which, generally speaking, makes the references to a point where not understanding them won't make the book worse for you. However, understanding them will make the book better for you, if that makes sense, kind of. And in terms of the, you know, R.F. Kuang is in your face and whatever, you know, I've seen some fucking stupid takes on this book to the point where I'm like, I can't believe you're saying R.F. Kuang is obvious and on your nose. I think R.F. Kuang, the thing with this book specifically is that it is a very layered book. And because the first layer of the book is so obvious, some readers might not bother to try and look beyond and see like the layers further down, which makes it feel like the book is obvious only. I don't think if you don't like the book you're stupid or anything like that. I think there's certain takes you can have on the book where I might question your media literacy, but generally speaking, it's just, once again, R.F. Kuang, it was the same thing with Babel. I think R.F. Kuang, I can really understand if you don't like this book. I can understand if this book is not for you. However, for a specific type of reader, this is almost perfect. And I will say, without context, if you could understand why the sentence "the Furies will definitely not have read Foucault" is funny to you, this book is probably for you. If you couldn't understand how that sentence would be funny, then this book might still be for you, or it might not at all. But funniest line of the whole year, just like. Also, this is not generally speaking for people in academia, but this is also more specifically for people within humanities, it feels like. But yeah, I appreciate it. Also, I don't know what it is about this book. Like, every single copy of this book that I own or that I have like held so far is oddly heavy for its size. But yeah, I'll try to maybe upload a review of this. We'll see. And with that, that was it for the books that I read in September. I didn't do Read Around the World. I did finish 2 series, or like continued on with 2 series, which was these 2. Didn't manage Read Around the World. I did, however, read at least 1 international or more international book this month. But yeah, I guess that's it for my last observations on my wrap up this month. If you enjoyed any of the books, if you have thoughts on any of the books, leave them down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as I said, the links to the 2 book clubs will be left linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!